I've been in church all my life, as far as I remember, and I just realized if I was to be walking down the street in Chattanooga or sitting in a beer joint somewhere or driving down the road and see somebody walking, and see Jesus himself, based on what I guess learned, exposed to, taught in church, I don't know if I'd recognize him. So that kind of led me to want to do these lessons on Jesus through these 5 women's eyes, to see what he's really like, because he's not this wimpy little feller that the devil wants you to think, that doesn't have any power and nothing. He's sort of a sissy, and he's not this horrible, judgmental, mean judge that's watching everything you do, waiting to smack you down. And the devil don't care which one you pick, as long as you don't pick Jesus, the right one. Anyway, taking a look at these, at Jesus through these 5 women's eyes, the first one I'm going to talk about is in Matthew 15:21, and you might be surprised. We don't have any Jewish folks here, do we? You might be surprised to know who you are in Jesus' eyes. Do you know what Jesus really thinks about you? Now, you've probably heard this woman's story 100 times if you've been in church for a while, but I bet you never realized what it really means for you. Matthew 15:21. Then Jesus went thence and departed into the coasts of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coast and cried unto him, saying, Have mercy on me, O Lord, thou son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed with the devil. But he answered her not a word. And his disciples came and besought him, saying, Send her away, for she crieth after us. But he answered and said, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then came she and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, It is not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs. And she said, Truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. Jesus called her a dog because she wasn't a Jew. That's got to be one of the strangest things Jesus ever said. I thought he was supposed to be so nice, so loving, and just welcomed everybody. Imagine being desperate enough for one of your kids to ask somebody, a doctor, whatever, for help, and they say they're not supposed to help you because you're a dog. Imagine that. Now, he had a reason. I'll get to that in a minute. Mark 7 said he was looking for somewhere to take a break, just to get away from the hassle between him and the Pharisees. But it wasn't working, because everybody in that Gentile area there had heard about him, and they heard he had the power to heal sick and raise the dead. She came to Jesus because he was her last hope. And she had everything going against her, because Jesus was on vacation. He hadn't come to minister, he had come to take a vacation. She was a Canaanite, a bitter enemy of the Jews. She was not a Jew. And she was a woman, not a man. Now, looking at it from her point of view, if you've ever parented in here, can understand this. But it don't say how her kid got the demon. It don't say that. But she knew it was going to take a miracle to cure her. In Matthew 15:21, she said, Have mercy on me, Lord, son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon. If your kid is sick, how far would you go to help him? When your son is sick or your daughter is, they ain't nothing matters except getting them well again. Why didn't our little Sunday school Jesus, why didn't he answer her? Why didn't he say, he didn't even say anything. He just ignored her, kept walking. Why? But Matthew 15:23, Jesus did not answer a word. Now, Jesus' disciples, they seen her, and I could just see them cutting their eyes at her, saying they thought she was just some strange pagan Canaanite woman that kept yelling at them, and they didn't like Canaanites anyway. But every time one of them told her to shut up, she just got louder, begging for mercy for her daughter. And the more they tried to get rid of her, the more she yelled. You reckon it made any difference if she was a Jew instead of a Canaanite? Would you reckon it had more sympathy on her? By the way, things are not always what they seem to be. Why don't God answer your prayers just as soon as you pray? You get down and you pray and pray for something, and nothing happens. Why? If he always gave you exactly what you need the first time, every time, it wouldn't take long before you started taking him for granted, you know. You'd start treating him like your personal little sugar daddy or your Santa Claus. But there is James, by the way, it's Jesus' brother. He don't claim it, but he is. James 5:16. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. That word fervent actually means boiling, like a pot of boiling water. It means you got to get your soul so stirred up that you can't think about nothing else. Nothing else mattered to that woman except seeing her daughter cured. That was a fervent prayer. Okay. All right. Why did Jesus call her a dog? Jesus is not supposed to talk to folks like that. He said in 15:26, it is not meet to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. I didn't know Jesus was a bigot, and I didn't know he was that mean. When woke, y'all know what woke means, when woke folks read that verse, they just have a field day with it. Well, the reason he called her a dog, he had a couple of reasons. Jesus was the Jewish Messiah. He fulfilled the Old Testament promises to Israel. That's why Jesus said, in verse 24, I am not sent, but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Never forget that Jesus is the Messiah of Israel. He came for them. He started with the Jews. He didn't stop there. God, I guess, intended to give us Gentiles the leftovers, the crumbs that the Jews didn't want. And second, Jesus wanted this woman to see her true condition. He wanted her to understand who she was and where she was and who she was talking to. And we all, especially us church folks, we all like to think we're better than we really are. But nobody's got a claim on the grace, mercy, or goodness of God. Nobody deserves heaven. Nobody. And by the way, we all like to think we're just a little better than that sinner down there in that beer joint. God don't grade on the curve. When Jesus says Gentiles are dogs, he is forcing that woman to understand her true condition and her true position. She had to see that she was completely outside the covenant of grace, excuse me, and had absolutely no claim whatsoever on him. He can heal her daughter. She knew he could heal her daughter. And he is willing to do it, but only if she humbles herself enough to realize she don't deserve it. You got to come to God through His grace, or you don't come at all. You can never be saved by hiding behind the filthy rags of your own self-righteousness. Now, the truth of the matter is the gospel was hid in that insult, calling her a dog. The gospel was hidden there. But that was the box Jesus put the gospel in for. It's the way He said, if you'll just admit that you're a sinner in desperate need of God's grace, we can do some business here. By the way, you're a dog, and so am I, unless you're a Jew. You might be a poodle, I might be a basset hound, but every one of us Gentiles are dogs under the Master's table, begging for the crumbs dropped by His children. If you think you deserve grace because you've been in a Baptist church all your life, you ain't never going to get it. If you admit that you don't deserve it and realize your true position and your true condition, you can have all the grace you need.
Amen.
But agreeing with Jesus is the right place to start down that road. Now, if He'd have called me a dog, I'll tell you what I'd have done. I'd have smacked Him. Well, most of us would have got mad. If He called you a dog and they'd have told Jesus, don't you talk to me like that, I'm a Canaanite. I ain't no dog, but she didn't. She didn't argue with Him. She agreed with Him. If you want to end up in the right place, you got to start at the right place. And this woman got it right. This stuff that she did is what we need to do. She never stopped praying.
Amen.
The more they told her to shut up, the louder she got. She never got mad. She didn't argue with Jesus. She never said He was being unfair or anything like that. And she didn't even, and if she did get offended when He called her a dog, she thought about it and realized, well, He's right. She basically said, you're right, I'm a dog. I ain't got no claim on you, Grace. You ain't got no reason to listen to me at all. Then she said the magic words, but even the dogs eat the crumbs under the table. Now, I got dogs. They sort of hang around the dinner table watching me because sometimes every now and then I'll throw them a scrap of food. Makes my wife mad because she can't run them out of the kitchen now. But anyway, after everybody gets done eating, the dogs get what the family don't want. She humbly asked for the crumbs of grace that could heal her daughter. She accepted her position, she admitted her need, and she agreed with Jesus. She never gave up. That'll get God's attention every time. That'll get His attention. In verse 28, Jesus said unto her, O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. Jesus called her faith great. That's the only time that word shows up, that Greek word shows up in the Bible. It's the only time it's in there. And we translate it mega faith. She had mega faith. And it's the only time He used that word to describe somebody's faith. He said it to a Gentile, not to a Jew. He said it to a woman of all people, not a man. Yeah, I know. Times is a little different now. Anyway, He said it to an outsider, not an insider. He said it to a pagan who believed, not a Jewish priest. He said it to a pagan. Now, that whole story is about that kid getting a demon thrown out of her, but it don't focus on the kid. It focuses on the woman. As far as the Bible talks, Jesus never even met that girl, never even met the daughter. He healed her long distance based on the mama's faith. Pray for your kids. Pray for your children. Because your prayers,
Bless you, Jesus.
Your prayers have great power with God. When your kids rebel, when they walk away, they turn into raging drunks or drug abusers or promiscuous, whatever, it makes you feel helpless. It makes you feel hopeless. Ain't nothing you can do. You try to talk to them, they won't listen to you. But Almighty God knows who they are, and He knows where they are. So don't ever stop praying for your kids. That be at home, boys. Now then, that's the way He dealt with one woman. That's not like the Jesus that I grew up in learning about in Sunday school. Okay, I'm gonna do another one now. I'm gonna talk about this woman at a dinner party. And it might have been the weirdest dinner party in the history of the world. For one thing, excuse me, Lazarus was there, and a few days ago, before this dinner party, he's dead. He's dead and buried for 4 days, as a matter of fact. He done started stinking, they thought. He may have. Then Jesus brought him back to life. And that got everybody in the town of Sail Creek, Bethany, whatever, wherever, stirred up. It got them all stirred up and got them real interested. And the dinner party was given to honor Jesus and to thank Him for raising Lazarus from the dead. And John pointed out in his book that Lazarus was sitting there at the table with Jesus. If you was at a dinner party and somebody was sitting there raised from the dead, what do you say to them? You know, what do you say to them? Do you ask them, hey, what's it feel like? That's just not a normal topic. Then this woman, Mary, did something. Oh, by the way, His disciples were all there too. They got invited too. Them Jews made a big deal out of those Sabbath suppers. It was a big formal affair. Anyway, Mary knew something about Jesus that nobody else did. She knew Him in a way that nobody else did. And she done something that shocked everybody. They couldn't believe what she was doing. Everything about it was wrong. Everything about it bothered them. That's why the story shows up in 3 different Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and John. It's in there in 3 different ones because it is so strange. She knew what was about to happen. Don't know how, but she knew what was about to happen when Jesus entered Jerusalem. Now, I'm going to read you the story. This is found in John chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. Excuse me. Then Jesus, oh, by the way, before I get too far into this, keep in mind that I'm trying to paint you a picture of Jesus through these women's eyes, okay? John 12, 1 through 8. Then Jesus, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, which had been raised from the dead, whom He had raised from the dead. There they made Him a supper, and Martha served. But Lazarus was one of them that sat at the table with Him. Then Mary took a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped His feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. Then saith one of the disciples, Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, which should betray Him, why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor? This he said, not that He cared for the poor, but because He was a thief, and had to bag and bear what was put therein. Then said Jesus, let her alone. Against the day of my burying hath she kept this. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. Mary knew Jesus was going to die, so she gave Him a gift that shocked and offended the disciples. But Jesus loved it. He loved it. Mary knew Jesus in a way the other disciples didn't. And I'm going to throw something in here that I probably shouldn't. That's the way I am, ain't it? That's it. Sometimes when my grandma would take me to a singing somewhere at a Church of God, she'd get offended at them folks that got the Spirit and went to hollering and wallering around in the floor and laughing and just having a big old time. And Jesus, she'd get offended by it. And then I come across this and I realized it's possible. 10 people know Jesus a little better or a little different than I do. But anyway, that's enough of that foolishness. Mary knew that in just a little while, Jesus is going to be riding a donkey into Jerusalem. He's going to clean out the temple, curse the fig tree, teach in the court there at the temple, and get in a fight, I guess you'd call it, with the Pharisees and the religious leaders. And that night, at that supper, is the last really happy time he was going to have. The next day, he got up and he started his journey towards the cross. Tonight they party. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow you die. I think I've heard that before. Tomorrow he's going to go in Jerusalem, and in 6 days he's going to hang on the cross. And Mary and Judas. Mary never said a word. Never said a word. And Judas said a little too much. One reveals her heart by what she does, and the other by what he says. John 12:3. Then took Mary a pound of ointment of spikenard, very costly, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the odor of the ointment. I didn't ever know what nard was. Nard is one of those essential oils. It's an essential oil that they get out of the root of the nard plant that's grown in India. It was very expensive. A pound of nard equaled about 300 denarii, as the way Judas reckoned it, and he should know, he loved money. Meaning it cost the same as 9 months of wages for a man working back in Jesus' time. Now, it'd be kind of like spending $45,000 on a bottle of perfume. $45,000 bottle of perfume. I'm going to be a little careful with it. Not only does she have this jar of expensive oil, she just pours it on Jesus' feet. Dumps it out. And the smell just filled the house. And I'm sure it smelled good, because it ought to for that kind of money. Did she go too far? My grandma would have said, rest her soul, and I love her to death. My grandma would have said, them holy rollers, excuse me for that, that's what she called them, they went too far. They're a little too extravagant. They do weird stuff, like pouring spikenard on a man's feet. They talk about Mary's, preachers talk about it, they talk about Mary's extravagant love, about her extravagant gift. That sounds about right when you pour out $45,000 worth of oil on somebody's feet. And by the way, Judas wasn't the only one that got offended. Now, she wasn't trying to show off her wealth. She wasn't trying to brag about it or anything like that. Judas actually spoke up and complained about her wasteful extravagance. And Matthew and Mark point out that the rest of them disciples agreed with Judas. They were all offended that Mary would spend that much money and waste it on Jesus' feet. Why? And how many kids could she have fed with that much money? Why'd she do it? Why did Mary do that? Why didn't Jesus call her down? Remember, Jesus had just raised Lazarus, her brother, from the dead. And that's the only time in history the two men that, well, one of them was raised from the dead and one of them's about to be raised from the dead, ate at the same table. When Mary saw Jesus raise her brother, she realized Jesus was a whole lot more than just a teacher and a prophet. She knew he had power that could only come from God. Now, there's 4 kinds of people that got anointed with oils of different kinds. In the Old Testament, they anointed kings, they anointed prophets, they anointed priests, and they anointed dead folks. Now, Jesus was already in the first three groups. Now, most of them didn't know that, but he was already in the first three groups, and in 6 days he was going to join that fourth group. Poor old Mary. Every time you see her in the Bible, she's sitting at Jesus' feet. In Luke 10, she wants to hear the words of the Lord. In John 11, she wants to experience the works of the Lord. And in John 12, she wants to declare the worth of the Lord. Hearing, experiencing, and declaring. Gee, that sounds something like what we're supposed to be doing. Anyway, she didn't come to Lazarus' house for that good food. She didn't come for the party. She didn't come to be seen. She didn't come to ask Jesus a bunch of silly questions. She didn't even come to listen. She came to give her best to Jesus. That's what she is there for. She didn't care who liked it. She didn't care who liked it. Didn't like it. By the way, her wanting to honor Jesus with her very best led her to violate all kinds of traditions and customs and etiquette rules and all kinds of stuff. Women did not let their hair down and sit at men's feet in them days. She had never sat at a man's feet, much less let her hair down in public, and she surely would not wipe his feet with her own hair. It was like him and her was the only two in the room. She didn't care if there's 1,000 people watching. It was a very private, very intimate act of worship that the others were only permitted to see. And they got mad. Judas complained about it, and the Jesus that we're trying to learn about said, shut up and leave her alone, pretty much. She's anointing my feet because I'm fixing to be buried. Nobody else understood what he was talking about. What? What did he say? That comment didn't make any sense to him at that time. The disciples, his own men, wouldn't even, and he'd already told them, but they wouldn't even understand it until about the day of Pentecost, I guess. It was after the crucifixion before they understood it. Now, did Mary have some kind of special knowledge about his death? Maybe she had that ESPN thing like my wife has got. She had some kind of intuition about it. She knew, she wasn't no fool. She could look around and she could see how bad the church, the Jews, were treating Jesus. They knew how bad the religious leaders were. There's the hatred and the opposition to him was just starting to boil out. She could see that Jesus didn't fit. He didn't fit in the religious world. Hey, that's us. He didn't fit in the religious world of the Pharisees and the religious leaders. Anybody that I know that hangs out with a bunch of drunks and a bunch of whores and such as that, and was called a friend of sinners, they wouldn't last very long in the religious world. And he actually touched an unclean leper. Then he let this prostitute touch him. Maybe Mary, not this Mary, we'll get into that in just a minute. Maybe Mary knew all that. She probably knew all that. She just figured, that boy ain't got long for this world. I don't know. But true love, like she had for Jesus, can't be explained. True love, deep love, honest to goodness love, can't be explained. Even when you see it, you can't understand it. Judas had a good point. He had a real good point. She could have used that money to feed a lot of kids, but so what? Love has got its own reasons, and them reasons can't always be spelled out too good. What do you say about Mary? She's all in. I'd say that pretty well covers her. If she ain't never played poker, well, never mind. She's all in. She's fully committed, and she don't care what you think. Be careful if everything that you do, everything you say, everywhere you go, be careful if it all makes sense. If your faith don't ever make you do stuff that don't make sense to other folks, you might be playing it a little too safe. If everything I say and do makes perfect sense to the world, then I need to do some soul searching. The world says Mary was a fool. I don't know if the world would ever call me a fool or not. And Judas, by the way, Judas fooled all these other disciples. You don't put a suspicious person in charge of the money bag. You give it to somebody you trust. By the way, Judas is called one of Jesus' best friends, by the way. That means them other disciples thought, hell, they held Judas in real high regard. That means they wasn't real good judges of character. That's what that means. Judas fooled them all. And it's easy to sit in church and fool folks, by the way. Now, there's somebody else that hates that kind of over-the-top, extravagant worship. The devil hates it. Whenever anybody becomes extravagant in their worship, the devil is going to stir up trouble. While Mary was worshiping the devil through Judas and them other disciples, he tried to change the subject. If he can stop your worship, he gets you arguing with each other. And soon you'll stop worshiping altogether and you'll spend all your time arguing with each other. I'm going to do it again, preacher. I went to a little church about 30 years ago. That preacher started I guess you'd call it a campaign of prayer. Earnest, fervent, effectual prayer for revival. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. And for 3 or 4 weeks, every service was dedicated to praying. I mean, heart-wrenching prayer to God for revival. And nothing happened for a couple of weeks. Revival broke out in that church. I'm going to try not to dance. Honest to God, revival. Not one of them little, you put a little sign out in front of the church, revival so-and-so's coming for 4 days. Not one of them kind of revivals. They didn't have no sign. They didn't have nothing like that. Them are some of the most spirit-filled services I've ever been in. There's people, there's tears and snot bubbles all over that altar. It was wonderful. There was people getting saved, backsliders getting rejoined to Christ. It was beautiful. It was wonderful. Didn't take long for it to make the devil mad. Just like it says here, Satan hates that. He hates it. So before long, he started a little argument. And cliques started forming. And they started arguing with each other. And it wasn't long. Oh, I left part of it out. They didn't have to advertise this revival. That church, I guess, it had 40 or 50 members there every Sunday. At the height of that revival, there was people standing up because they wasn't nowhere to sit in that church. Okay, anyway. It didn't take long. That strife started. That arguing and all that stuff is gone. Satan killed them. They're just now getting back on their feet. All right. It's kind of like when them wise men from the line of Daniel, by the way. That's another story. Them wise men give Jesus all that gold and frankincense and myrrh over in Matthew 2. What happened next? Old King Herod tried to kill all the baby boys in Bethlehem. Judas loved money, and Mary loved Jesus. You can't love money and Jesus at the same time. Now Jesus, he didn't call her down. He was pleased with her worship. Now, that don't conflict with caring about starving young'uns somewhere, but in this case, Mary chose what was better. It's not that they were wrong, it's just that she was right, and Judas was a lot worse off than anybody knows that night. Don't let anybody tell you to back off from your love for Jesus. Now we're going to get to that offensive woman I was talking about just a minute ago, and look at Jesus through her eyes. In Luke 7:36, and one of the Pharisees desired him that he would eat with him. And he went into the Pharisee's house and sat down to meat. And behold, a woman in the city, which was a sinner, pardon me, when she knew that Jesus sat at meat in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster box of ointment. No, this is not the same Mary. And stood at his feet behind him weeping. And began to wash his feet with tears. And did wipe them with the hairs of her head. And kissed his feet. And anointed them with the ointment. Now when the Pharisee, which had bidden him, saw it, he spake within himself, saying, this man, if he were a prophet, would have known who and what manner of woman this is that toucheth him, for she is a sinner. And Jesus, answering, said unto him, Simon, I have somewhat to say unto thee. And he saith, Master, say on. There was a certain creditor which had two debtors. The one owed 500 pence and the other 50. And when they had nothing to pay, he frankly forgave them both. Tell me therefore, which of them will love him most? Simon answered and said, I suppose that he to whom he forgave most. And he said unto him, Thou hast rightly judged. And he turned to the woman and said unto Simon, Seest thou this woman? I entered into thine house, thou gavest me no water for my feet, but she hath washed my feet with tears, and wiped them with the hairs of her head. Thou gavest me no kiss, but this woman, since the time I came in, hath not ceased to kiss my feet. My head with oil thou didst not anoint, but this woman hath anointed my feet with ointment. Wherefore I say unto thee, excuse me, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But to whom little is forgiven, the same loveth little. And he said unto her, Thy sins are forgiven. They that sat at meat with him began to say within themselves, Who is this that forgiveth sins also? And he saith to the woman, Thy faith hath saved thee. Go in peace. That's one of the greatest short stories in the Bible, in my book. The preacher and the prostitute. It ain't even about her, by the way. It's about him. A Pharisee invited Jesus to one of them formal Sabbath evening dinner parties. It'd be like sort of like the Pope inviting Jay Reed to dinner or something. Now, any host back in them days with any good manners at all is expected to greet his guest with a kiss of welcome as a mark of affection, water to wash the dust off their feet, and a little bit of oil rubbed on their forehead, kind of like a air freshener, because hygiene Never mind. It's kind of like what we do nowadays, be like hugging somebody, a good friend, or shaking hands, taking their coat and giving them something to eat, finding them a place to sit down. They're just common courtesies. The same was true of the kiss, the water, and the oil. And by that Pharisee not doing that, that was a breach of etiquette, an act of unkindness is what it was. That preacher, Pharisee, he was a preacher. Pharisees were preachers. The main character, old Simon, the Pharisee, most of the time Jesus didn't get along too good with them Pharisees. But this Pharisee actually invited Jesus to come to his house for dinner. Old Simon must not have been a very good Pharisee, because he was tolerant. He was broad-minded. He was broad-minded enough to invite this radical rabbi from Nazareth, where everybody knows nothing good come from, to dinner. He probably figured it won't hurt nothing. After all, it takes all kinds of folks to make a world. He was a Pharisee, but it don't look like he was a very good one. He wasn't committed to anything. He wasn't deeply committed to nothing. And he liked hobnobbing and rubbing shoulders with the rich and the famous. He liked to be around powerful people, and Jesus was this rising star that Simon wanted to be seen with. So it's not like he was committed to Jesus. It's not even like he liked Jesus. It's just a social invitation, and he didn't probably like all that hard talk that Jesus was doing about robbing widows' houses and being whitewashed tombs. He didn't necessarily like all that. It was just a casual meal. It wasn't no big deal. Old Simon, like a lot of us, he was just a curious bystander in the game of life. He thinks of himself like he don't ever like to get backed into a corner. He's just a middle of the road man, whichever way the wind's blowing, middle of the road. Now Jesus had come to eat dinner at the house of this Pharisee, and excuse me, so far everything's going pretty good till this party crasher come walking in. This unidentified, uninvited woman comes strutting in boldly, just walking in like she owns the place. And she walked around that table till she got to where Jesus was. Luke 7:37 says, and behold, a woman in the city which was a sinner. I admire them folks that wrote the Bible. They got a delicate way of saying stuff that ain't too delicate. That's a delicate way of saying she was a whore, a prostitute. She made her living selling her body to men. And any other time she wouldn't get caught dead in the house of a Pharisee, and a Pharisee wouldn't get caught dead around her. When she walked in, everybody, what is she doing here? They all knew. Makes you wonder how they know, but they all knew who she was. And they knew how she made her living. One thing about her, a woman in her line of work's a good judge of character. She's a good judge of men. She could tell Jesus wasn't nothing like them other men. He wasn't going to use her and just throw her away. She heard his words, and she heard a way out of her ugly life. Now, on the other hand, the preacher sitting over there, he can't believe what she's doing. He can't believe what Jesus is letting her do. He's letting her touch him. She starts to anoint Jesus' feet with this perfume, and she starts to cry and can't stop. I've seen that before. I've done that before. And she cries, and her tears is falling on Jesus' feet, so she takes her own hair and dries his feet. Then she smothers his feet with kisses and anoints his feet with that perfume. If I saw my wife at Long John Silver's, anointing some man's feet with, anyway, if I saw that, I'd think, that's kind of strange a little bit. But you got to remember her background. As far as it being strange for her to do that, she was a prostitute. She is used to touching men. And she wasn't ashamed to show her emotions. Why is she crying? She's crying because she loves Jesus and she ain't ashamed of it. She stands to honor His greatness. She weeps, overwhelmed with sorrow over her past. She wipes Jesus' feet with her hair, a sign of deep humility. She kisses His feet. Now, in them days, like I sort of halfway hinted a minute ago, hygiene wasn't a big thing. I don't know if I'd have been over and kissed somebody's feet. She anoints His feet in gratitude for what He has done for her. She was saved. I'll get to that in a minute. Simon, the preacher, watches this shocking, very sensual scene, and he ain't ever seen nothing like it. It goes against everything he's ever been taught. This sinful woman touching Jesus and caressing Him and stuff like that offended him deeply. He would never let a woman like that touch him. The whole thing was sick. It was disgusting, revolting, and dirty. Then Jesus tells him a little story about them creditors. Nice, simple story. He says, Simon, which of them two men is going to love the lender more? Simon, he feels like he's being backed into a corner, so I guess the one that's got the biggest debt. In Simon's eyes, in the preacher's eyes, the prostitute was the man who owed $50,000. Her debt was to God was enormous, because in Simon's eyes she was an enormous sinner. Compared to her, I guess Simon thought his debt was about $5. But that ain't the point. The point is if you're broke, you're broke. If you owe $5 or if you owe $50,000, if you ain't got it, you can't pay it. Some of us owe more, some of us owe less, but there ain't a single one of us that can pay a single penny of what we owe. Old Simon's starting to sweat. But he's figured out from what Jesus said that Jesus is telling him there ain't no difference at all between you and that prostitute, Simon. Simon's problem is easy enough to see. He's like church folks. He thinks he's better than he is. He thought he was better than that prostitute. Jesus was. Simon said, she's a sinner. And Jesus said, no, she was a sinner, and you can't handle it. If you think you've been forgiven a lot, you will love Jesus a lot. If you've been raised in church and taught that you're okay, don't worry about it, you're okay, you think you're okay, you ain't been forgiven a lot, you ain't going to love Jesus a lot. Am I stomping too many toes?
You're getting there.
Then Jesus turned around and He spoke to them, and I'm hurrying, by the way, I know what time it is. Then Jesus spoke to them, and I'm making up for last week. Anyway, then Jesus spoke to that woman for the first time. There's three things to her. Your sins are forgiven. That takes care of the past. Your faith has saved you. Take care of the present. Go in peace. That takes care of the future. He didn't say, don't sell your body no more. He don't have to. He set her free. What about Simon? He got a little more than he bargained for. This story is not about the prostitute. This story is about Simon, the religious, whatever, leader. He wouldn't commit to nothing. And then this prostitute who risked everything, Jesus welcomed her and would have welcomed Simon, but Simon couldn't see Jesus, and he couldn't see himself. Simon's problem wasn't the fact he couldn't see that woman, it was that he couldn't see Jesus. And Simon's other problem was he couldn't see himself. Simon said, I don't owe him nothing. So he didn't risk nothing. The woman said, I owe him everything. So she risked everything. She risked walking in that Pharisee's house and making a complete spectacle of herself over Jesus. Most, he don't know what I mean when I say church folks, does he? Most church folks have forgot where they come from. If you was raised in church, you'd probably have a hard time doing what she done. We think we love Christ, but we don't really love Him that much because it's hard to realize what you actually was before. Your sin seems small to you, okay? And if your sin seems small, your love is going to be small. We're all like that woman, every one of us. We're all guilty. We could never pay what we owe. But I'll tell you a little something I noticed about that story. The worst sinners make the best saints. They never forget where they come from. Since we're all sinners, we all stand in the need of the grace of God. There ain't no room for no spiritual pride in the body of Christ. Ain't no need to talk about who's better. That woman, I don't know if she ought to be in this church or not. You know, there ain't no room for that junk. Because apart from the grace of God, we'd all be going to hell. You know, they ain't no cookie cutter Jesus. These women, pardon me, these five women that I talked about two in the previous lessons. The woman taking adultery, the woman at the well, the Canaanite woman with her demon-possessed daughter, and the woman that poured that expensive ointment, and the saved prostitute and the Pharisee. The one thing that I took away from that is there ain't no cookie cutter Jesus. There ain't no cookie cutter Jesus. If you was to meet Jesus on the street, well, in the first place, He'd be hunting you down and He would come to you. That's another story. If you was to meet Jesus on the street, He wouldn't talk to me like He'd talk to Dougie. He wouldn't do to me what He does to Dougie. He would go straight to my heart. I mean, boom, straight to it. He don't mince words. He don't condemn. He don't condemn nobody. None of these stories did I see Him condemn. And He didn't even condemn Simon. But there's hope for all of us. And the Jesus that you need to get to know is the one that met these five women, not the one that them little prepackaged store-bought cookie cutter Sunday school lessons tell you about. You need to meet the real Jesus, and He'll change your life. Thank y'all for putting up with me. I'll see you next week. Sorry, everyone.